Welcome to the Cohesion Podcast. Before we dive in, let me tell you about Simpler, the AI powered employee experience platform that's revolutionizing internal communications. Simpler helps you build a vibrant company culture, transform your digital workplace, and boost employee productivity. Want to see how Simpler can elevate your employee experience? Visit simpler.com/cohesion to download our free guide on creating an engaging digital workspace.
Hey, everybody, I'm Carolyn Clark. This is a conversation I have been waiting to have. Kelly Clark, welcome to the podcast. You're one of the people who makes comms just look easy. I feel like even when it's anything but easy, people like you make it look easy. Kelly's incredible. Let me tell you why, and then we're going to hear all about her. One, she's built functions from absolute scratch. She's coached leaders through all kinds of a mess and momentum, and she's always stayed people first. And that's one of the things I learned in my first conversation with her. We're going to talk about trust and change and leadership and how endurance gives you a sense of how comms people need endurance. And I think, Kelly, you're going to be a great example of that too. So welcome to the show. We're going to do some icebreakers. Hope you're having a good day today. I'm glad you're here.
I am. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to have a good conversation. Let's start it off by getting to know you a little bit. This is one I haven't prepped you for, but when you are needing to just shake it off, when it is your, like you just need a break, what is your go-to either song or ritual?
Oh, well, ritual is easy. As you know, I am an avid runner. And so for me, anytime I need to shake anything off, my go-to is fitness, typically running, but sometimes the gym. Song is a little bit more challenging, but definitely something that is energizing, pumps me up, fuels me for the day.
Yes.
And it depends on kind of the mood, but for my running playlist, it's a mix of 90s hip hop, some rap, some rock, all of the things.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, yes, and we're going to talk much more about your running, but I can imagine that is a good way to shake things off for sure. For me, it's walking in my yard, just checking on my plants, those kind of things. All right, if you were not in comms, what do you think you'd be doing right now, either creatively or in, career-wise?
Love that. I actually think it would be something that relates to comms, but also fuels my passion. So one of the things I love doing is international travel.
Ah,
So I kind of fancy I would love some type of way to turn my comm skills into a career of travel blogging. That would be awesome. Also, maybe writing a novel. I've always thought that would be very cool and a twist and getting more creative as opposed to business writing. So yeah, maybe something like along
ah.
those lines.
I love that, and, you'll have to tell me at some point what your next planned trip is. There's so many incredible places to visit. Okay, last of the icebreakers before we get into it. Obviously, we know that running is close to your heart in endurance sports, and I think you said you've been running since you were maybe 15 years old or pretty young. When you think about leadership, and we're gonna get into your career and where you've dealt with all kinds of leadership, what do you feel like you've learned from endurance sports about being a great leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of parallels actually when you kind of break it down. I think first and foremost, goal setting. That's a huge one. For long distance specifically, setting sights on whether it's a marathon, half marathon, and if you're just starting out running, like when I initially was, it's okay. Well, what do I need to get there? What are the smaller milestones? And
Yeah.
breaking it down just to an achievable bit. So that could be your first week. A long run could be 3 week or 3 miles. The next week it could be four. So really looking at it like that. And then I think accountability, that's another huge one. Holding yourself accountable. There's so many days where I don't want to get up. It's cold. I don't want to go outside and run or I'm tired. But having set that goal, it's holding myself accountable and I'm going to go out there, I'm going to log the miles. I think similarly, in addition to holding yourself accountable, you have to be flexible and adaptable.
Mm.
So I will go out there, but maybe what I set my sights on, I can't do because my body's not performing the way I want it to. And even if I push through it, sometimes that's um, a choice, but other times it's not. And it's being adaptable and listening to my body. And I think same thing in the work setting. It's all those things are very true. You have to goal set, you have to hold yourself accountable and your team's accountable, but then also you have to be adaptable. And in a way that's from a leadership standpoint, it's meeting people where they are. And the how becomes less important.
Mm.
It becomes more about really tuning in, listening, and adjusting your plan accordingly based upon where people are at. So again, a lot of parallels.
Oof, a lot of parallels. And one thing you just said that I really like is that I would never think of. I am not a runner, but it's that listening to your body, listening to what's around you. You've got a lot to be aware of. And yeah, I can see those parallels in comms. I want to rewind a little bit and talk about your career from the start.
Yeah,
Your story didn't start in internal comms. You began in PR. I also
good.
began in PR, so I know that world. They're similar but different worlds. But and then I know you moved into executive comms at Cisco. What what pulled you from the PR side into the executive side? Like what made that click for you that you were like, I think internal is the space I wanna go in, or executive comms.
I'd love to say that it was like a clear decision for me. It wasn't. I thought I loved PR when I was in it. And I could see myself building a career, my entire career in PR. But Cisco came knocking and it was a great opportunity because I thought, in addition to PR, this is a great way for me to round out my experience and just get more breadth instead of just depth. And so I really thought long and hard about the decision to go there, but had the opportunity to join a great team, some great executives, and then that got me into internal a bit, and because I got to do kind of both, right? So a lot of executive communications also touches on internal communications, as you know, leading all hands events, doing a lot of internal memos. So the two are very close as well, and I got to dip my hands in that. And then the next place I went to, EMC, is where I got to build a function from one of the opportunities I got to build a function from the ground
From
up in internal
scratch, right?
comms. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're in this PR space and then you get into this mixed role. Let me ask you before we talk about EMC, because I really do want to hear a little bit about what it's like to start from scratch, and because that's a different game. But do you have a preference now? So when you think back, like when I think back to PR myself, sometimes I think, oh my gosh, I could never go back. And I think it's because I have found so much, some of the complexity, the behavioral complexity in internal comms. Do you associate yourself now on the internal side, or
For sure. For
yeah?
sure. I have the same thought process where I was like, "Oh, it I loved it for my time there, but I don't know that I'd go back." My reason's a little bit different. I'm just truly passionate about the employee experience. I think being an employee, in being on that side of it and being at really great organizations with solid cultures or being at the opposite, it just makes such a difference in not only your work life, your personal life, and the trickle over there. So I'm just very passionate about being able to move the needle in terms of making an employee experience great and what comms can do as a strategic lever for that.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like when you went to EMC and you were starting from scratch and you had certainly some of the experience, but what what helped you to, again, when you were at base level, you really have to earn trust and build that credibility. How did you start to do that?
Well, in that particular role, I had known the executive who brought me on.
Oh,
He was
thank goodness.
actually I had, worked with him in a previous position when I was in PR. He was one of the executives I supported, and he was impressed with my work. And now that I had somewhat of a exec comms and internal comms background, he brought me on to his division with EMC. And so I had built trust with him, but I'd still had to build trust with the leadership team. So a lot of it, as with any role, is listening and learning. Really spending the first several weeks getting to know the organization, the execs, the employees, the sentiment, mulling over anything that has been done. Even if you're building something from scratch, there's data that you can pull on, and then I always try to tune my approach about where the organization is at the time and where they want to go. And I think earning trust is really number one, showing that you are adept to the business needs and you are looking at it from that standpoint, not just, hey, this is what I think we should do, but really, this is where the business is at today. This is where it's going, and kind of working backwards from that. Um, and and having it, I think it's always good, even though you have the long-term goals and you keep those in mind, always having some low-hanging fruit that you can knock out of the
Mm,
park right away and earning trust and credibility that way. And being able to do that with one of the ways I did that was I leveraged my time at Cisco. That showed me a lot of what great looked like in terms of
mm,
video production. And believe it or not, when I joined EMC, they were still on WebEx. They did not have video streaming for the all hands. So one of the early wins was to bring that in, and it made such a huge difference in the, like, survey scores and the employee feedback, with people reaching out to the president of the division just saying, wow, I am in Sweden right now and I get to see the
uh,
president giving this all hands in real time and being able to like ask questions in a chat. It was just a totally different experience, and that earned me a lot of credibility, among other things, but that was a huge one for me.
I really like what you're saying about kind of we all have a bit of a playbook we can go in. And I love that where there are certainly low hanging fruits. So that assessment of, look, here are the things right from the beginning that I'm going to assess. Here are the things that I know I'm going to do from the beginning. And I also really appreciate that you said, like, just because you're starting from scratch, it doesn't mean that you're starting with nothing. You've got so much data. Every organization has data that is rich if you can get into it and kind of decide either behaviorally or about the culture or even about just pain points. So I really like that because I do think for a lot of our listeners who are either in a really small team or starting, it's hard to believe that people are still starting from scratch, but they are, right? There's still some organizations that don't have this function front and center. So I really like that. I think that's some good tips there. Like, know what data you have access to, use the data you have access to, bring in your A game from the beginning. Like, if you know you're incredible at video and that one small change is going to make a difference, do it. So I really like that. I know when you wrapped up EMC, you went to a completely new world in Meta. And I want to talk a little bit about Meta because you were there during some of the most intense moments. And, we'll put the current Meta moments to the side and not talk about those because there's still a lot going on, I think, there. But COVID, you were there during many of the racial injustices that were happening. I think you all went through a rebrand during that time,
Yeah.
layoffs, all kinds of things. So let's talk about the Meta game, but
Yeah.
first tell me, how did you make that choice to go to Meta? It's such a massive organization.
Well, actually, so after EMC, I went to 24 Hour Fitness,
Oh
and
my God, that's right.
then I went to Meta. And so I will just say, like, the 24 Hour Fitness was a departure. I've been in tech pretty much my entire career. I went there because it was my opportunity to not just lead internal comms for a function, but company wide. And then also my passion with fitness, it was just a great fit. But then I got an opportunity to interview with Facebook and lead the Facebook team. And so after several rounds of interviews, I honestly thought it was a long shot to even get that position. So it was never like, yes, I'm gonna get this, but I ended up getting it, and yeah, again, it was a great opportunity. So it was an easy decision for me. I joined 5 weeks before COVID, so it was a whirlwind. My duration there was about 2.5 years, and as you said, all the events that had happened, definitely. So there's a lot of leading the organization through all the things that you mentioned, as well as in that time, folks might remember there was a negative news cycle that lasted many a months, and in leading the employees through that change, the Meta rebranding, several product strategy shifts, yeah, a lot of turbulence, I would say.
Yeah, well, and and thank you for reminding me of 24-hour fitness. I
Yeah.
want to come back to that
Mm.
at some point in this because I think that is such a departure from tech. And when you're thinking about Meta and Facebook, I realize that you went through that rebrand to Meta while you were there. So much of your job there is to help everybody else stay
Mhm.
grounded and help the employees, help your executives that you're supporting stay grounded. how did you do that? And how did you personally, because I think a lot of us have gone through not quite that level of intensity, but many levels of intensity they are now and trying to figure out how do I get myself grounded and then how do I get
Mhm.
everyone else grounded so that there's not just a free for all? How did you navigate that and keep yourself kind of focused and grounded?
Yeah, I mean, I think from an employee perspective, when and I'll take that part first, and then I'll say how I keep me grounded. But my North Star then and still today is kind of like it's threefold. It's one, leading with empathy. I really, I stay grounded by trying to put myself in employees' shoes,
Mm,
what they're going through, considering different perspectives, holding space for all of those perspectives. I think that's a very challenging line to walk,
mm,
but the organizations that do it and do it well, it makes all the difference. I think the second area is transparency, just trying to be as transparent as possible and working with leaders, partnering with them and making sure they show up in a way that's authentic and it's
mm,
transparent. There's a lot of times I think I've been at companies, whether it's Meta or others, where the tendency is we don't know what's happening, so let's not say anything. And I think that is a wrong move. As you know, when you stay silent, swirl can go, swirl just happens. And so I think to me, and what I've tried to coach leaders on is even if we don't have all the data, it's okay to say that. It's okay to go, you know what, this is happening. Here's this, our assessment of the situation. We don't have all the details. We will get back when we
mm.
do. But then that shows taking initiative to communicate, being proactive about it, getting ahead. Yeah, I think this helps you get ahead of the narrative too, but it also shows employees like, look, we don't have all the answers, but we're going to be committed to getting those for you. And what you can expect from us is continuous communication on this. So I think being transparent in all those ways. And then I think the third area is really just fostering safe spaces for dialogue, open dialogue, and two-way feedback. Obviously, it's always, employees want to feel seen, heard, and valued, but especially in those times. And I think back to specifically the racial injustice protests while I was at Meta. We had a lot of forums, or well, it was Facebook at the time, but we had a lot of forums already where people could voice their opinions. But we found that it wasn't enough, or those particular forums weren't. They weren't working in the way that we needed them to. So one of the things that we did is we had panel discussions on the issue. And again, we didn't have all the answers, but
Right.
we put together a panel just to have an open conversation about it, take questions, also worked with the people team in creating more circles. So I think all those things can help in huge times of change. And then I think the second part to your question was how do I stay grounded? And that's all easier said than done.
Yeah.
But definitely easier said than done, but for me, protecting my physical and mental
Mm.
health, it's very easy to give those up in times of chaos. But for me, I need to do the things that keep me grounded so that I can show up in a calm and collected manner. And again, it's going for my morning run, not saying, "Oh my gosh, I got to be on a work call." No, making time for that, and then going into my work call.
Right.
Um, yeah, or spending time with family. That's a huge one for me too. They keep me grounded. Another way I do that is being intentional. I spend a few minutes, whether it's before work or a meeting, to really think about how I want to show up,
Mm.
and that does a few things. It's like okay, I feel like I have the opportunity to, as a comms professional, to kind of set the tone. It's up to me to set the tone and not feed into the
Yes.
frenzy. And it makes a huge difference if I set that time aside, even if it's like 5 minutes in the morning to really think about it before going in and remind myself. So that's a huge help. And then the last thing is just really practicing gratitude and empathy for myself. And the gratitude's huge because again, I think it's natural and human to go, oh my gosh, this is happening in the world. And how does this impacting me? But when I really think about it, I think two things. Number one, it's, you know what? I have an opportunity to help lead in this moment. It's a defining moment and it's scary or it's challenging. But what an honor to be able to do that. And
Yeah.
making that shift has helped. But then also, again, going back to, okay, it's not about me, it's about the employees and what are they going through, and just really, again, trying to be attuned to that and paying very close attention to sentiment because that can change. And Meta specifically, it changed in a matter of hours. And so just staying focused and attuned to that, I think is a way to stay grounded as well.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head in so many places there. I think I always kind of liken our jobs a little bit to this idea that we are flight attendants in mid-flight. And, one of the things that you were talking about, I think, in showing up and preparing yourself before you go into a room, whether it's a room of, 1,000 employees or a room of two executives, you are going to influence that. So your vibe, it's same way a flight attendant, who I'm always going to look at if there's turbulence. If they
Yeah.
seem, like they've got it under control, they're calm, cool, and collected, I always feel better. And I think that's similar to the roles that we spend is not only are those executives looking for that calm, collected kind of influence over them, but the employees are too, and I really like that, and I think taking that moment before you're going into anything,
Mhm.
we all know we're gonna have our own reaction. As you said,
Mhm.
we're humans, we're employees of these organizations as well, but being able to compartmentalize that and kind of deal with
Mhm.
that separately and then show up as an advocate for all of these other employees is really impressive. I know when you talk about creating when we talked previously a little bit about Facebook, you talked about these safe spaces, these forums, these Q&As. One of the things, and I'd just be curious to get your thoughts. The intention is always there to do that. How do you make sure that it is a safe space? How do you make sure that what you're putting out there and saying, "Come here,
Mm.
say what you need to say, talk to each other," that actually is true? Were there any things that you did to set that up ahead of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think Meta was an interesting case because there were certain guardrails that we had to pay attention to as internal comms people. That we were also
Yeah.
going through an evolution at the
Oof.
time where at a lot of forums people could say whatever they wanted, and that was great. But as we got bigger, we had to put some
Mm.
guardrails in place. So that helped and it hurt a bit, but it helped because it set some ground rules of like, hey, we want this to be a safe space. So in that capacity, this is what's acceptable. This is what's not
Right.
for these reasons. So just being very clear and intentional about the purpose of them and that we're inviting dialogue, but to make sure that it is a safe space, that certain things just have to be there in place. So I think that helped. And then I always go back to listening because I feel you can come with the best script, you can come with the best intent, as you said. But I think being able to really be in the moment and listen and sit with what people are saying and hearing, or and really how they're showing up and what they need, and being attuned to that and being able to adjust it on the fly, I think is huge. So I think
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest percentage of it. A lot of those, honestly, were also moderated by a professional. I don't claim to be a professional in that space by any means at all. So I think having somebody who is a facilitator and knowledgeable in that area has been helpful too, because they can really moderate the discussion and take it places that you may not be able to.
Oof, that's such a good reminder. That's something, honestly, makes me want to write it down for myself is you don't have to always be that moderator. And I think we find ourselves as comms people, we're that first choice often to host a town hall or to do the thing. But there are, particularly in areas like racial injustice, in areas like health and COVID times, there are legitimate professionals whose entire careers span these topics, and bringing them in as outside voices. I think that's such a smart decision to make because it puts you in a vulnerable stage as the company. You're saying, "Hey, let's get someone in who is really credible on this topic." And it just shows you're able to kind of release some of that, control of whatever the scenario is. So, oof. Now, let me pause because you had gone from tech,
Mhm.
then you went into 24-hour fitness, and then the rest of your career so far has been in tech. But let's go back to that little blip of changing complete industries.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? I know you had a personal passion, obviously, but was it a challenge to completely switch out of tech?
Completely, yes, because, different model altogether. As comms people, we're obviously accustomed to working with different audiences and tailoring your message, but the setup is completely different because if you think of 24 Hour Fitness, they're mainly a club model. Most of their employees are in clubs. So at the time that I was there, there was about 22,000 employees when I first started. And I want to say 20,000 were in clubs. So it's
Wow.
how do you
Yeah.
reach them? These people are front desk folks, they're personal trainers. How do you reach them? They're not on email. There was regulations which I knew nothing about because I'd been in tech, and there's different regulations that apply to different industries where if they are part-time employees, they can't be on a mobile phone. So how do you get to them? And a lot of it was brass tactics, going back to some of that and old school things like bulletin boards, which
Yeah.
is neat. But I think, yeah, that was super tough. And I also I have this knack for joining organizations when they're going through a lot of change. But during my time there too, there was declining market share. So they had to pivot their
Mm.
strategy. And that meant a lot of club closures and
Oof.
restructures. They also had a new board team come on, which meant a new leadership team. So there was a lot of change and I think I was there about a year and a half. So it was different in the sense that model was completely different, a lot of shifts. And I think but it was a lot of fun too. And it was one of the most in terms of like passionate cultures, it was everybody believed in the mission and creating happy and healthy,
Yeah.
like, for their members. And so I've never been in an organization was more committed and more aligned around that. And that was awesome to see.
Think it's a good reminder. I've been in tech the whole time too, and I think it is such a great reminder that, when you're a knowledge worker, when you're sitting in front of your computer, it's a completely different ball game than if you're a personal trainer who needs to remember about a benefit, for yourself. It's a completely different world. You're not in front of that computer. Ooh, I bet that was really interesting. And then so you went from 24 Hour Fitness, you went to Meta, and I will also say when you were talking about Meta and you said you didn't expect to get that job, I find all internal comms people to be so humble about our skills, and so I feel the same way. Any job I've ever had to go for, I'm always like, "There's I don't I not a have it's not a confidence lack, it's just like a maybe it's a humility, I don't know." So, okay, so you went to Meta, we talked a little bit about that, and then you ended up at Gong, and and I know that the experience with Gong was a bit different, so you're getting back into tech at this point, but it's a smaller team. I believe you were the first one doing internal comms there, right? So talk a
Yeah.
little bit about how you made that jump. And then I want to get into some of your Gong time because I think that's where you really refined a lot of some of these humanity skills. So I want to get back to that, but tell me about Gong and how you made that choice.
The choice is easy. I mean, I one of the things, when I look back on my career, the things that I love most is building an organization or a function from scratch. I find that work to be incredibly rewarding and fun. So being able to do that, and there's just it's pretty cool to be able to say I'm the first internal comms hire, and I get to build a world class function. And it wasn't a completely blank slate, but kind of. And
Yeah.
so to be able to have that opportunity too, that was easy. And then also just the interviews that I had, I felt really good about the choice and my manager and the larger team that I was joining.
And when you were at Gong, I want to talk a little bit about you. You obviously have worked with so many different leaders and executives, but I know you have a passion for not just people showing up polished, but showing up real in their real human self. Let's talk a little bit about that. Like when you are working with executives, they want to come across polished, they want to be completely competent, they want to be all that. But often when they're working on that, they miss that humanity side, that realness, that actual edge. How did you work with your executives, either at Gong, and I'm sure you can reference other experiences to go from this polished, put together self to a real connected leader?
Yeah, I think at Gong, I didn't have that issue just because it's a founder-led company, and the CEO is very mindful of that. So that was easy. He shows up as is very authentic, and people love it and they see it and it radiates. At other companies that I've worked for, some of the bigger ones, I'm thinking specifically about Cisco.
Mm.
I was supporting the COO and his events at the time, and when I joined that particular organization or that function, The events that he did were completely scripted, even the Q&As. They would not take any new questions. It was all questions that either had come in that they solicited in advance or that they seeded. Um, and yeah, he wanted to come across as as completely polished. And I did go in there, and I'm not taking my advice when I say this, but initially I had said, "Hey, well, why don't we take questions on the fly?" But I didn't have anything at that time because I just joined to back it up, so
Oof.
it was sort of dismissed. But I used that as an opportunity. Okay, we'll do it this time around, and we did a survey, which they didn't have any before, but it was an opportunity for me to get some metrics and some candid feedback from employees. And probably not to your surprise, but the feedback that we got was exactly that. It was employees saying this this came across as disingenuous. It felt very canned. Why
Mm.
didn't we get to ask any questions in real time? And being able to show executives that type of feedback and say, well, what if we experiment a little bit and it's maybe not everything's like on the fly, but getting them to see that maybe if we tweak just a couple of things, could that make a difference? And so we did that. We started doing that little by little with the Q&As, and then again looking at the metrics and how they changed over time. And it was actually funny because not only did they get more comfortable with it, they loved it and they completely went off script after after a few
Then you have a
times.
different problem. You got to pull them back, right? Yeah.
Totally, but it was great to see the turnaround because then that in turn, as you know, when you're coming across and you're not completely monotone and scripted, employees pick that up and you're just being yourself and you're being human. And I think a lot of my coaching is also just whatever execs are comfortable with. They have to be comfortable, obviously, but
Sure.
let that human side out. Show them a little bit of who you are as a person, not the executive, but what makes you tick is like give them some details about your personal life. Mix that in where it feels right to you because that's the way you're going to connect. So things like that, and it's made all the difference.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. I don't know if you've had this experience, but over my career, when I started my career, there were these executives. I also, was in big tech. And so we had these big personalities, really, really polished, relatively intimidating. And I knew that they had these lives. They had these little things, these little pieces of humanity, but they never would bring them to the table. And I think
Mm.
that may have been just an old school way of kind of, hey, you keep your personal life on the side, you keep everything, front and center, professional. And I do think, like you said, whether you have access to data or just if you can shift, you can gauge the shift in vibe and mood of the employee base. When somebody shows up authentically, you know it and you feel it. And I've always kind of struggled to like convince executives like even if you have to practice being authentic and being human, which sounds a little bit odd, but when you're used to just presenting, I'm like, get those stories in your head, get those examples. So that's an exercise I imagine that you've done too, is I'm just make my executive teams like, have your list on the side of the things you can come back to relate to other people, whether it's your pet or your sport or your kids or whatever it is. Find something that can humanize you, and I also like what you talked about, just, being able to get up there and say, I don't know all the answers, or we're gonna have to figure it out together. I think that does make such a difference. And it's a good reminder from you, right? You can measure these things. And so if you're getting pushback, if somebody says, no, I only want scripted, or we won't take anonymous questions, it's like, well, let's let's rethink that, because the data is certainly gonna show that when you let when you open up the gates, people are a little, for good or bad, they're gonna come out with real reality and questions. So, oh gosh, yes, I'm having like PTSD from my Yahoo days when we would do a weekly all hands, and again, yeah, these same kind of conversations were really critical then. Whew. And I mean, I guess let me ask you one more thing about it is before we get into the next section is why do you think it works when they let their guard down? What is it?
I think that when people feel like they're getting the real person, that gives people the permission that they may or may
Mm,
not know that they have to also show up as real and be authentic. And I think just there's something about when somebody shows that's the word of vulnerability, because I think
Mm,
showing like who you are does take some level of that. And I think stories that are real, I feel like, are the best stories because anybody can relate to them, whether they're good, bad, and showing the human side of things. And I think it gives permission for people to to do the same.
yeah.
And I think that's what works. And also, I think when leaders show some level of humility, eh, I, again, I just think we all have that common human experience, and I think work is just, yeah, again, maybe this is an old school way, but you showed this and showed this and showed this way. In COVID, I think broke down a lot of barriers in the
Yeah.
sense of I have to be polished and I'm going to be on the screen and I'm going to look just like this. There were so many things, as you know, going on, pets coming in, kids coming in, but I think that really did a lot for work, actually.
Yes.
It made it
Yes.
acceptable to show up a certain way, and I think we saw the benefits of that as comms people, and there's some level of informality that works, though, that way,
Yeah.
and you just get to know people, and I think the larger question that you asked me, I think why that works is because when people feel they can be real, it builds a real sense of community. And when you can bond with somebody and you can relate to what they're saying, you just feel more connected to them and to the culture. And that's huge.
Ugh. Well, and I think the last thing I'll say, but not to harp on it, is I think it can be taught, which is something that maybe people don't think about. And certainly authenticity can't be taught, but teaching people to show up with that, to let go of the any shame or ego or anything that they're coming to the table with. I think that can be taught, and I think that is something one of those underlying skills that a lot of us comms people have is helping people to get to that point, which is it makes I'm proud of that about us. I think we're most almost I probably talked to 200, probably more than that, frankly, internal comms people in my career, and there is this one core thing that we do have the ability to teach people to show up the way that they should, and I think that's a skill. It's certainly a skill that I don't think about enough that I have, that I'm sure you have, and that many others do too. I want to talk about a little bit something personal. So I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I live in North Carolina. And when she was in third grade, she was part of an organization called Girls on the Run, and had the best experience. She is not a runner today, like in a distant way, but the things she got from that organization, and I know that's an organization that is so near and dear to your heart. Will you just tell me a little bit about Girls on the Run and your experience there? Why that was something you chose to give your time to outside of just work?
Well, first of all, I didn't know your daughter was a part of it. You didn't tell
Yeah,
me
she
that in our conversation. That's
Oh my
awesome.
god, yes, it's well, and we live in such a community where, fitness and outdoor fitness is huge, and that program, especially in states that are a bit depressed, in terms of, poverty level, all of that, they don't have the exposure. It's free, it's an amazing program. I mean, they even do a camp. My god, a free camp. It's like 8 to 5 for $100 a week, and you're like, "God, that's incredible that it's giving that opportunity to so many people." So, yeah, she was in it and she loved it.
That's awesome. Love that. Yeah, so I mean, I got involved. I was a coach for a couple of seasons a few years ago, and I got involved because it combines obviously my passion of running,
Yeah.
and I'm I'm very big on helping girls develop their self-esteem. I also have a daughter. She's now 23,
Oh,
but yeah, but it's something that's very near and dear to me because I got into running when I was 15, as you mentioned, but the reason I got into it, and I'm not completely proud of, but it was to lose weight at the time. I felt like I needed to lose weight. And as a person, as a high achiever growing up,
mm,
school wise and recovering perfectionist, I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I had somewhat low self esteem and body issue, like just dysmorphia issues.
sure.
And running at that time, when I first got into it, was to serve that purpose, but what it became for me was a lifelong outlet to just get everything, just lifelong outlet to get everything that like stress, anxiety, anything that I was feeling out there. And I've gotten so much from running. Like it's literally transformed the way I've seen myself in a lot of ways because I've been doing it so long, and just made me a stronger person overall in terms of having grit, resilience, knowing I can withstand. challenges, um, feeling comfortable in my own skin. It's
Mm,
interesting that over years you can see kind of like how something has really helped you grow as a person, but it's done so much for me, and I think the opportunity to get involved with girls on the run at age, like you said, when they're 11, 12, 13, whatever it is. I think they start as young as 9, but,
yeah,
you know, they has pressures that even when we were growing up may, not have had with the social media. We had our owns with the
totally.
magazines, but they have a different set of pressures, and I feel like just being able to hopefully make a difference and ignite some kind of fire and passion in them and see what they can like, what running can do for them mentally, that's kind of where, like, I love, but also the tangible goal of achieving their first 5K, that's pretty awesome too. But the confidence that you get in, like, seeing a goal through, as we talked about at the beginning, I think that's huge, and for me, like, I wasn't planning on being a lifelong runner. I got into it to lose a few pounds, but the benefits that it did for me physically and mentally, mainly mentally, it's made me stay with it. So, yeah, like I said, I wanna ignite that fire and that just kind of, like, feeling of self-confidence, and I can do anything that I set my mind to and with young girls,
Oh,
and I love the program for that.
that's awesome, and I can imagine that, when you're spending time with young women, young girls, you there's a lot to learn about confidence, about communication. I have that experience with my daughter constantly as she's headed into middle school next year, just starting to think about how that relates to the job that I do. I imagine you learned a lot about communications and confidence in that, from those girls that you were coaching.
Yeah, just in a lot of the as you know, a lot of the, like, weekly trainings developing certain skills, so a lot of it's not just running, like, we will sit down
Right.
and we will do, kind of coaching in that way and talking about their days. And some of the questions that we would ask is, what happened that didn't go so well today? How did you show up? How would you like to show up differently? But getting them to think a different way. So that program is so much more about more than running. And it's also instilling communication in them and letting them know that they have a voice and having them kind of think through their day or a certain situation and kind of problem solve. So it does so many
Oof.
different things, and I think it's just
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, and it ties directly to what you do every day with the executives you're supporting and employees. So I can totally see that. As we get ready to wrap this session, first of all, Kelly, I've never wanted to be a runner until hearing you talk about it. I'm like maybe I should start running. So that's a very motivating thing. I can see your passion and just how you feel about it, and
Yeah,
it's pretty inspiring. So I'm gonna
thank
maybe I'll get out there and I don't think I could run even 1 mile today, but you know what? As you said, I bet I could eventually. Um, you've you've obviously, I mean, you've been at iconic brands and you've had some really, really complex scenarios. As we kind of wrap this up, is there one thing, if you could share with any communicator, one thing about, that they can take with them no matter where they work, what would that be? And how do they define the second part of that is also, and then how do they make sure it's good that what they're doing? How do they check and balance themselves?
I think it's easy to get into a frame of mind where, for me anyway, early in my career, I was very much, oh yeah, I got to prove myself. I got to show up a certain way. And at that time, it wasn't like staying calm and collected, but it was like I got to show that I know my stuff. And I think it's
Mm,
just I've gotten more from just knowing that I know anything or know everything, and being showing a level of humility that and also desire to learn. And so I think just listening and really, whether it's listening to executives, listening to employees, I've gotten all of my any kind of communication planning comes from that,
yeah.
honestly. And then I think even I'm gonna slip a second one in there because I think it's been
Good,
so
love it.
important. I'm a rule breaker, but, I think adaptability. I think that's so
Mm,
important too because what I've learned more than anything, it was funny. I had a coworker early on in my career, and I thought he was crazy at the time. He said, "Kelly, the problem with you is you start your day with a list of things to do, and you get upset when you don't check it all off." And he said, "I don't have a list going in because I know things are gonna blow up." And while I thought that was nuts, and I still have a list to this day, I just anticipate I'm not gonna get through it all, and then
mm,
things are going to change throughout the day or throughout the week, and that happens. And I think just being adaptable, whether it's you're listening to something and they change your point of view on something, and even though you had a strategy, being willing to course correct. Same thing with a crisis happens, being able to really lean in and not get freaked out and, okay, this is what I was going to do today, but now I got to switch gears. I think just being listening and being flexible are the two biggest things I think any communicator can do. And really, like, and I think the second part of your question was like, how do you check yourself on it?
Yeah.
Um, I think doing, like, for the first one, the listening, is if things are hitting the mark with employees. I mean, obviously, any kind of metrics you can track, and sentiment is so important. And is it landing? And so, because that tells me, that says you are listening to them. If the sentiment
Right.
is somewhat shifting in a positive direction. But I think the other thing is like being flexible. Checking yourself, same thing, metrics.
Yeah.
If the old way wasn't working, then it's probably time to shift a couple of things around.
Yeah. Oh, flexibility, adaptability, and listening, absolutely core. And I can see, that is the thread in this whole conversation for me is that, what you brought up, it's such a core part of the work we do. Kelly, I loved this conversation. I loved learning about you. I love learning about other comms people. I can't wait to see what's next in your journey, and I hope we get to have you back on to hear about what that looks like too. But thanks for spending time with us and for sharing your wisdom. I'm really grateful.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I've loved having the conversation with you and learning a little bit more about you and your daughter. That's awesome. And yeah, no, appreciate you having me and love to be back again sometime.